Well, good day, my friends. It's your old pal, Jordan the Lion. How are you all doing today? Oh, well, that's kind of a mixed response. Well, I'm doing pretty well considering the snow. I still want to go out and do a vlog today, and I had planned on going and visiting someone who made a real dent in the wrestling business, and I didn't really appreciate him until I was probably about 20 years old when I saw a movie that he was in with Andy Kaufman. Today, we're gonna go visit the grave of the great, classy Freddie Blassie. Daze with Jordan the Lion, a whole lot of snow, and St. Louis begins right now. What are you thinking of the snow, Ja? Not a big fan, huh? Definitely a pretty nasty day to be out doing this, so we're not gonna be out very long. Love those houses though, those are great. Alright, here we are, Resurrection Cemetery. If I can go straight. Car doesn't want to go straight. Being that it's a Catholic cemetery, there's a lot of really interesting headstones like this one. So he's in section 11, which is one of the first main sections that you come to when you enter the cemetery. And he's actually right here by the road. So in order to find Freddie, you have to find the 11 marker that is right by the road. And then there's a big tree here. And he is right over here, in between that tree and that tree, where these red flowers are. And the name that you're gonna look for is Eli Militich. And this is Anna Militich, which you can't see because of the snow and everything really. But best as I can figure, because I went to the office and they said that indeed Freddie Blassie is buried here. Well, he's cremated in an urn, and he's actually right, well, technically on top, but right here. So unfortunately, it looks like Fred Blassie doesn't have a grave after all these years. Thank you, train, for making all that noise. So Freddie Blassie, maybe we need to do a fundraiser to get him a headstone. I don't know if he didn't want one or what, but he certainly deserves one. Maybe one of the most memorable managers in wrestling history. He was kind of Bobby Heenan before Bobby Heenan. And even before that, he was a fantastic wrestler, one of the most hated, loved to be hated wrestlers there ever was. Freddie was born in America, and his family were German immigrants, and he was accused of being un-American as he was growing up. And he eventually got into boxing, started boxing, loved it, but then he discovered wrestling, and he loved wrestling even more, so he started doing some local wrestling in St. Louis, which is why he's here. Not to mention that this was a major hub for wrestling back in those days. It was, St. Louis was kind of like, if you made it to wrestling in St. Louis, you were really somebody. So he ended up starting a little bit of wrestling, but then he enlisted in the Navy for World War II. And then when he came out of the Navy, went back into wrestling and decided, once he started wrestling in Georgia, they were like calling him a Yankee, and they didn't like him, so he just like fed into that and started calling him himself the Hollywood fashion plate, dyed his hair blonde like Gorgeous George. He would basically take all the things he learned from the wrestlers he loved that were hated and use those, and then took them a little further, because he used to take a file, like a nail file, out to the ring, and he would file his teeth threatening his opponent that he was going to bite him. And in many cases, he did bite him and draw blood. That was something that he was known for, was what they call getting color. When you had a match, if you made somebody bleed, it was called getting color. He would do that, and he would make the fans so mad that at one point, he had to have police escort him to the ring. He had acid thrown on him at one point. Someone threw a boiled egg in his face, and he was not able to see out of one of his eyes. He just encountered all kinds of abuse. People tried to stab him. He was threatened constantly, but he loved it. The more they did, the more he played into it. And he would even say that when he would go wrestle in California for years, his promos in California would say, all the women in Los Angeles are pigs, and he didn't care what they thought of him. And the only ones that were gonna get mad at him calling him pigs were the ones that were pigs, and he didn't care about them anyway. So he was a feared wrestler. He was one of the first to go over and put Japanese wrestling on the map. When it first got started, he went over and took on their big superstar in Japan and even dropped the title to him to kind of help build Japanese wrestling. But when he came back for a rematch, he ended up biting the wrestler in the head so bad that he was bleeding and everything, that he really was famous in Japan. Now that would come back to create a problem for him later, because he would eventually, he was married 3 times. His 3rd wife was Japanese, and he fell in love with her. And I remember when he's in the Andy Kaufman My Breakfast with Blassie, he says he loved her because she loved to make her man happy. She like lived to serve her husband, kind of like the old-fashioned way. But when he met her and he fell in love with her, her parents were not accepting of this relationship because they had seen him draw blood on that wrestler on TV, and they just thought he was a total maniac. In real life, he was a pretty nice guy. Now, as good of a wrestler as Freddie Blassie was, and as much heat as he drew even more as a manager, because California had a law at the time that they would not issue a wrestling license to anyone over 55. So once Freddie hit 55, he wasn't allowed to wrestle anymore. So he went to become a manager. He ended up managing the Iron Sheik, Hulk Hogan, Jesse the Body Ventura, and he was one of the few people to ever work for every member of the McMahon family, because eventually Freddie was up in the New York territory, and that's when he was working with Hulk Hogan and all those guys, managing them. But again, he was so dislikable that just him showing up to the ring with a wrestler would give the other wrestler heat, whether they did anything to earn it or not. Pretty interesting. And Freddie was also one of the very first in the wrestling business to start doing any kind of acting jobs or do anything outside of wrestling. He was on TV. He would be on talk shows. They even say that he was the reason that Regis Philbin's career took off, because he used to go on the Regis show and talk all crazy and get all worked up, and then he would threaten Regis, and people just loved it. And so Regis, his whole life from then on, was always a proponent of wrestling. He was at WrestleMania 3. He would take any opportunity that he was invited to be a part of wrestling. And Freddie was in like movies. I remember he was in Body Slam, and of course he got wrapped up with Andy Kaufman there for a while, because Andy Kaufman was the women's champion of the world, or so-called, and that was totally feeding into what Freddie Blassie used to do, which was the talking like men are superior and that women were inferior, and it just kind of all played together. Like I said, Andy associating himself with Freddie would immediately give Andy a little bit more heat. I was so confused because when I went to the office, I told him, I said, everywhere online I'm seeing that these are the headstones, but the dates, the birth and death dates, don't make any sense. And he said, well, they can put on anything they want on a headstone. And he said, Freddie should have a headstone out there, but I had been out here looking before the snow, and I just scraped all of these that were around him, and none of those are his headstones, so he definitely does not have a headstone. And in a day when it was not popular to lose wrestling matches because people didn't really know the business, they didn't know sometimes these were preconceived outcomes, when he lost in Japan, so that, you know, he lost the title, which is a big deal, because what if they didn't give it back, you know? He lost the title with the the honor of hoping that this would help build Japanese wrestling, and I thought that was pretty cool. And even 5 days before Martin Luther King gave his I Have a Dream speech, it was said that Freddie Blassie had wrestled a black wrestler and lost to him, giving his title over to him. And Freddie had 40 titles during his career, but somehow he was known more as a crazy manager, an outspoken manager, than almost anything else. I just don't understand why he doesn't have any kind of headstone. Maybe it was how humble he was, or who knows. But God, I wish he had one. I feel like he really deserves one, as big of a personality as he was. And I'm kind of surprised if this is his parents. I've seen some people online say that Anna here, the Anna who is buried here, was his first wife. I don't know if that's the case, but I'm just kind of surprised if it's his parents, because of his relationship. He spent more time with his grandparents than his parents. But I found out about Freddie mainly from seeing, I was a big Andy Kaufman fan, and when I saw My Breakfast with Blassie, I didn't really know what to think, because Freddie Blassie, his career and everything was really kind of before my time. I started following wrestling about 1986, 87, and Freddie kind of faded away from the scene during that time. But the movie, you know, I didn't know it was a spoof when I first watched it. I didn't know what it was. So I'm sitting here watching this movie of Andy Kaufman taking a bus to a Sambo's restaurant. He gets there and he starts having a breakfast with Fred Blassie, and they're just talking about the wrestling business, and they're talking about all kinds of different things that are going on in Andy's life. And Andy starts messing with all the tables, like all the people that are sitting at tables around him, and creating all kinds of trouble. And while he's doing it, Freddie's kind of they're catching Freddie's reaction to it. And I always just thought it was great. I didn't, you know, eventually after about 2 or 3 times, believe it or not, it took me that many times to realize, oh, this was a total setup, that's his writing partner who pulls that straw out of his nose and all that stuff. But it made me a fan, and the more I dove into learning about Fred Blassie's career, I just thought, wow, what an incredible person. Now, there's no way that I could end this vlog without talking about probably his most famous saying, which was calling people pencil neck geeks. He was so known for this that he actually had a hit song. He made his own record, and it was called Pencil Neck Geeks. So go listen to that song where he describes why he hates a pencil neck geek and what a pencil neck geek really is. I would love to know what happened to all those colorful outfits he used to wear. Something like that should eventually be in a wrestling Hall of Fame, because he wore the most colorful outfits you can imagine. Plus would go to the ring with a cane when he was a manager, so he'd always end up using that cane on people. Rest in peace, Freddie Blassie. I hope we can get you a headstone someday. We're going to title this video, "Why Doesn't Freddie Blassie Have a Headstone?" Maybe we can draw some awareness, and someone in the wrestling community will see fit to help us get that accomplished. Thank you all for watching. Have a great night, and goodbye.